Okay, good morning, class. This is Miss Cash, and I am here to show you how to do today's worksheet. And what we're going to be working with today is reducing radicals. Radicals are also known as square roots and some other kinds of roots that we haven't dealt with yet. But I'm going to give you some process for what you need to do. Rather than making this video too long, though, I want you to pause it here if you need some time to write that down. So pause it now and write down the steps. Okay, and hopefully you paused that and now you're ready to look at an example. And we're going to use those steps to go through an example. So suppose I ask you to simplify the square root of 80. I'm not looking for a decimal answer. I'm looking for an answer that's in what we call reduced radical form. So the first step, number 1 there, says to factor by dividing out any perfect square. Well, what are the perfect squares? Hopefully you got a times table from the sub today. And if you look where I've highlighted down that diagonal, those numbers are special because those are our perfect squares. For example, I highlighted number 9 because 3 times 3 gives me 9, or 16 because 4 times 4 is 16. We're looking for one of those numbers that will divide evenly into 80. So I do notice that 4 right there definitely divides into 80. How do I know if I can't just tell? Well, I'll take my calculator and I'll divide. 80 divided by 4 gives me 20. So I know that 4 times 20 is the same as 80. So I'll rewrite that as 4 times 20. Then step 2 says to square root the perfect square. Well, 4 is a perfect square. Its square root is 2. I'm going to put that number in front of the square root and leave the 20 inside. Step 3 says repeat as needed. Well, 20, I can also divide it by 4, can't I? So I'm going to have to repeat that. 20 can be rewritten as 4 times 5. So I rewrote the 20 as 4 times 5. Again, I'll have to square root 4. So I've got the 2 that I originally had. And then when I square root 4, I get another 2. And I still have the square root of 5. So 2 times 2 is 4. And then I get square root of 5 along with it. Now you might be saying, Miss Cash, that's doing too much. I have to do it twice or 3 times. Well, you don't necessarily, because if you'd noticed, instead of dividing by 4, you'd started with 16, and you did 80 divided by 16, you'd find out that 16 times 5 gives you 80. When you square rooted 16, you would have gotten that 4, and you could have been done at that point. So if you look for the biggest possible square root, you can find it that way.
So are you out tomorrow?
Okay, so let's look at the second example. If I ask you to do the square root of 250, the first thing you're going to do is look at your list of square roots and try to decide which one of those numbers will divide evenly into 250. Hopefully 25 rings a bell there. Let's take 250 divided by 25 and see how that works. If you didn't know, you could just start trying all the list. 250 divided by 25. I get 10. 10's a pretty small number. None of the other perfect squares divide into it, so I know I've got my smallest one possible. So I'll rewrite 250 as 25 times 10. Then I square root 25. The square root of 25 is 5. Bring that out front, leave the square root of 10, and I am finished with that one. That's all I have to do. Let's look at one more, because this one's a little different. What if we have a number in front of the square root? That's okay. We're still just going to focus on the number underneath the square root, in this case 192. I'm going to start with my calculator on that one because that's a pretty big number, hard to do in my head. And I'm going to start dividing it by perfect squares. So I'm going to start with 192 divided by 4. Well, that gives me 48, but I bet I can come up with something bigger. So I'm going to keep going. 192 divided by 9 is my next one. No, because it's got decimals, so that is not going to help me. So I'll try the next one, which is 16. Oh, that helped. It gave me 12. But 12 can still be divided by another perfect square, which is 4. So I'm going to keep going, see if I can find an even bigger number. 25 is my next perfect square. No. 36 is next. No. You see how I get decimals, so that tells me no. And 49 just feels wrong, but I'll try it. No. And finally, 192 divided by 64 gives me a positive 3. Now, if that hadn't given it to me, it wouldn't be my last step, but I just knew it was coming. 64 times 3 is what I'm going to rewrite it as. I kept the 4 that was in front, and then rewrote 192 as 64 times 3. Next, I'm going to square root 64, which gives me 8. The 4 that was already there, and all that's left inside is square root of 3. So finally, I'm going to take 8 times 4. That gives me 32. And I still have my square root of 3, and I'm finished with that problem. So from this point, you can go ahead and do the first few problems up through number 8 on that worksheet for today. You know how to do at this point. There'll be another video with another URL for you to watch when you're ready for the second part that says add or subtract the radicals.